Welcome to the adventure of the Highland Clearances cipher, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire. The unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1896. It is with some considerable reflection that I present these accounts, drawn from what I understand are now declassified Foreign Office documents, a curious collection of official reports, intercepted communications, and indeed, personal letters penned by myself and Mr. Sherlock Holmes to various governmental personages. These narratives, which I have termed the Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, illuminate a tumultuous period, from roughly 1885 to the brink of the Great War. During these years, whilst the British Empire stood at its zenith, beneath the veneer of imperial grandeur, Holmes and I navigated a labyrinth of colonial intrigue, confronting secrets that threatened the very foundations of British power, from the shadowy alleys of London to the distant reaches of our dominions. Allow me now to recount one such particular adventure from this collection, a matter of grave import which we came to know as the adventure of the Highland Clearances cipher. Chapter 1. The November evening drew in, a chill fog swirling about our Baker Street windowpanes. I attempted to interest myself in a medical journal, whilst Holmes, in his armchair, was deep in a medieval palimpsest. The silence, broken by the fire's crackle and a distant steamer's hoot, was shattered by a sharp rap at our door. His head snapped up, the palimpsest forgotten. A late caller, Watson, and one of urgency, if the impatience of that knock is any guide. Pray see who it is, Sherlock Holmes said. Certainly, Holmes, remarked Dr. John Watson. I rose to answer the summons. A commissionaire bore a note on a silver salver. The thick, creamy envelope displayed a familiar, discreet crest. Holmes took it as I returned, slitting it open with a paper knife. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly as he scanned the contents, the paper crinkling slightly in his grip. From Mycroft, he announced briskly, all languor gone from his voice. An immediate summons to the Diogenes Club. A matter of gravity has arisen, Sherlock Holmes said. Our hansom soon clattered to a halt before the Diogenes Club in Pall Mall. The usual London din faded, absorbed by the club's heavy stone facade and its famous, almost tomb-like silence. We were ushered through silent halls, members like statues, the only sound the faint rustle of turning pages. In a private antechamber, smelling of old leather and unspoken confidences, we found Mycroft Holmes. He stood before the fireplace, portly and imposing, his brow furrowed with a care that seemed to add to his bulk. He nodded curtly as we entered, his voice, when he spoke, a low rumble. Sherlock, Dr. Watson, your promptness is appreciated. This is a matter of extreme delicacy and potentially grave consequence to the Crown, Mycroft Holmes replied. He gestured towards a small table upon which lay several sheets of paper and a small, stoppered vial containing a dark, viscous liquid. The very air in the room seemed to still, awaiting his pronouncements. We have, over recent weeks, intercepted a series of coded communications, he continued, his gaze fixed upon the papers. They appear to emanate from circles espousing a rather fervent brand of Scottish nationalism, invoking grievances related to the Highland Clearances. Ordinarily, such sentiments, whilst regrettable, might be dismissed as mere rhetoric. However, the nature of these ciphers and certain accompanying intelligence suggest something far more organized and potentially far more dangerous, remarked Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft paused, his words settling in the silence. He picked up the small vial, holding it to the gaslight. The liquid within gleamed with a peculiar, deep luster. The primary concern, he stated, his voice dropping further, is a credible threat to vital naval infrastructure in Scotland. Some of these communications, or rather notes associated with their transit, have been penned using this. It is a highly specialized ink, developed for and exclusively used by certain departments within the Admiralty for sensitive cartographic and strategic documents. Its presence here is deeply alarming, replied Mycroft Holmes. His eyes, which had been fixed intently upon Mycroft, now darted to the ink vial. Exclusive, you say, Mycroft. Its distribution strictly controlled, Sherlock Holmes noted. Precisely, Sherlock, Mycroft affirmed, a troubled note entering his usually placid tone. Which leads to the most disquieting aspect. There is a growing suspicion that the leak for leak there must be may originate from within. We have noted, for instance, some rather unusual requests from a Lieutenant Davies, a naval attaché. His official duties concern liaison with foreign naval attachés, yet he has recently sought highly specific details regarding Scottish coastal defences and harbour schematics, particularly around the Firth of Forth and the northern approaches. He has requested information on tide patterns, lesser-known anchorages, and even outdated fortification plans, citing a need for comprehensive threat assessment that seems disproportionate to his role. Nothing definitive, mind you, but his diligence has become pointedly specific, and his justifications for these inquiries increasingly tenuous, remarked Mycroft Holmes. I saw a flicker of intense interest in Holmes's keen features, the familiar tightening of his lips that always presaged the hunt. To him, a complex problem was as the scent of fox to hound. He leaned forward, his voice crisp and decisive. The ciphers, Mycroft, and a sample of this remarkable ink, if you please. This is a challenge I should be very glad to address, Sherlock Holmes responded. A sigh, almost of relief, escaped Mycroft. I had hoped you would say as much, Sherlock. The papers are yours. The security of the realm may well depend upon your peculiar talents, Mycroft Holmes replied. Armed with the cryptic messages and the vial of Admiralty ink, we left Mycroft and the Diogenes Club's oppressive silence. As our cab rattled towards Baker Street through swirling fog, Holmes was lost in thought, fingers drumming impatiently on the package in his lap. I knew that look. The game was afoot, and our lodgings' quiet would soon be shattered by the fierce energy of his deductions. Back in the familiar warmth of Baker Street, so unlike the austere Diogenes Club, we settled in. The cheerful crackle of the fire and its dancing shadows couldn't quite dispel the weight of Mycroft's summons. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the challenge. He had shed his coat and waistcoat and now paced before the mantelpiece, his brow furrowed in concentration. The intercepted messages spread upon the central table beneath the gaslight's steady hiss. He paused his restless movement, snatching up one of the cryptic papers, and then the small, sealed vial Mycroft had provided. The scrape of a match was followed by the pungent aroma of his chemical apparatus coming to life. For some time, the only sounds were the clink of glass, the occasional murmur from Holmes as he peered through his microscope, and the distant, rhythmic clatter of a hansome's hooves on the cobbled street below. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp with a nascent excitement. Watson, observe this. The ink upon this particular message, it is most intriguing. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I drew closer, peering over his shoulder. He had prepared two slides, one with a scraping from the coded message, the other with a minuscule droplet of the dark, official-looking naval ink from Mycroft's sample. Under magnification, he continued precisely, the granular structure matches exactly. See the crystalline formations as it dries, and that faint blue tinge when heated. No doubt about it, Watson. This ink is either the same as, or derived from, the Navy's special compound for sensitive documents, stated Sherlock Holmes. Good heavens, Holmes, I exclaimed, the implication striking me with considerable force. Then the leak Mycroft fears, it must be genuine, but from where? Commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes made no immediate reply, his attention already shifting back to the messages themselves. He spread them out, his long fingers tapping thoughtfully upon certain phrases. The content itself is a curious admixture, he mused, his voice a low rumble. We have clear references to the Highland Clearances, phrases of lament, names of places scarred by those tragic events. And the language, much of it is Gaelic, or purports to be. Sherlock Holmes noted. He picked up another sheet, his gaze narrowing. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the soft rustle of the paper in his hand. Yet it is precisely here, Watson, that inconsistencies appear, like flies in amber. Look at the Gaelic. Some words are out of time, more like modern Gaelic than the old dialects of the 18th or early 19th centuries. And these clan tartans, he tapped a specific line, the details are historically questionable for the supposed era. Some patterns mentioned, the specific sets, simply didn't exist back then or weren't standardized, declared Sherlock Holmes. So you believe them to be forgeries? I asked, my voice betraying my confusion. Dr. John Watson said. Not forgeries in the conventional sense, perhaps, he corrected, his tone thoughtful. Rather, a careful construction. Someone with considerable, though imperfect, knowledge of Scottish history and language is trying to evoke a particular sentiment, to stir old grievances. The naval ink, Watson, that is the primary thread. It anchors this affair to the present, to official channels. These historical allusions, these linguistic quirks are the tapestry's color and texture. The ink is the warp it's woven on, declared Sherlock Holmes. He rose and went to the window, peering out into the foggy London night, the gaslight from the street casting long, distorted shadows into the room. The murmur of the city seemed to press in around us. The clearances, he said, almost to himself, his voice reflecting a deeper contemplation. A wound that has never truly healed in some quarters. The passion it evokes is potent. To understand the mind behind these messages, we must understand the depth of that historical grievance and how it is perceived today. These inconsistencies, they might be mistakes, or they might be deliberate signposts intended for a specific audience, explained Sherlock Holmes. He turned back, a new resolve in his keen grey eyes. Watson, he declared, his voice regaining its customary briskness. Our next step must be to consult someone with a more nuanced appreciation of these Highland matters, someone whose family history is intertwined with those very events. I believe a conversation with Lady Beatrice Foxglove might prove most illuminating, Sherlock Holmes said. The peculiar properties of the ink, coupled with the anachronistic Gaelic and the unsettling references to the Highland Clearances, had clearly seized Holmes's full attention. He paced our Baker Street rooms for the better part of an hour the following morning, the floorboards groaning a rhythmic complaint beneath his restless feet, before he stopped abruptly. Watson, he declared, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of London drifting in from the street below. Our inquiries require a perspective steeped in the very history these ciphers invoke. Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Her family, if I recall, has deep roots in the Highlands, and her knowledge of societal undercurrents is unparalleled, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A hansom was swiftly summoned, its wheels clattering a sharp rhythm on the cobblestones, conveying us to the elegant tranquility of Mayfair. Lady Foxglove's residence was a grand affair, its stone facade imposing yet welcoming. A liveried footman, precise and silent, admitted us into a hall, still and fragrant with beeswax and old roses. As we entered a beautifully appointed morning room, the profound quiet was broken only by the distant, muffled clang of a drawing-room clock. Lady Beatrice Foxglove entered moments later, a figure of grace and quiet intelligence. Her greeting was warm, her voice a cultivated contralto, hinting at Scottish melody, yet refined by London society. Sunlight, filtering through tall, lace-curtained windows, caught the silver threads in her hair as she gestured for us to be seated. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she began, her tone one of polite curiosity. It is always a pleasure, though I confess, your visits seldom herald trivial matters. A delicate porcelain teacup chinked softly as she gestured towards a waiting tray. Answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Indeed, Lady Beatrice, Holmes said, inclining his head. His voice was even, yet I detected an underlying urgency. Your unique understanding of Scottish history, particularly concerning the Highland Clearances, may prove invaluable to an affair of some delicacy, deduced Sherlock Holmes. At the mention of the clearances, a shadow seemed to pass over Lady Foxglove's expressive features. The smile remained, but her eyes, bright and discerning, took on a more somber cast. The gentle ticking of the mantel clock seemed to grow louder in the momentary silence. The clearances, she said, her voice now softer, tinged with a sadness that resonated deeply. A wound that has never truly healed for many in the Highlands, Mr. Holmes. Generations have passed, but the memory of dispossession, of families scattered to the winds, remains a potent force. It is a history etched not just in books, but in the landscape, in the names of deserted villages, in the very soul of the people. Lady Beatrice Foxglove said. I listened, captivated by her earnest recounting. It was one thing to read of such events, another entirely to hear them described with such personal conviction. Holmes, I observed, leaned forward, his gaze fixed upon Lady Foxglove, absorbing her every word. The faint rustle of her silk dress was the only sound accompanying her voice. And these lingering resentments, Lady Beatrice, Holmes interjected, his tone gentle but probing. How do they manifest in the present climate? Are there active expressions of this historical grievance? Stated Sherlock Holmes. There are always currents beneath the surface, Mr. Holmes, she replied, her voice regaining some of its former crispness. Whispers of nationalism, a yearning for a past, perhaps idealized, but deeply felt. Frustration with London, with policies perceived as indifferent to Scottish concerns. These sentiments ebb and flow, but the old sores can be easily inflamed, especially when fanned by those with particular agendas. Her words were chosen with care, remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes narrowed in thought. I could see the new information settling into the complex architecture of his theories. The air in the room seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. The quiet hum of the city outside felt a world away from the historical grievances being laid bare before us. The anachronisms in the Gaelic, the peculiar choice of historical references in these ciphers, Holmes mused, almost to himself, yet loud enough for us to hear clearly. It suggests not merely a scholar of history, but one who seeks to weaponize it, to stir specific embers. Your words, Lady Beatrice, illuminate the emotional landscape upon which such a fire might be kindled. The ink may point to the means, but you have shed light upon a potent, deeply rooted motive. His voice was sharp with dawning comprehension. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Our discussion continued for some time, Lady Foxglove providing further nuances regarding the social fabric of certain Highland communities. Eventually, as the light outside began to soften, Holmes rose. The teacups sat empty, the earlier delicate chinking now replaced by a thoughtful quiet. Your assistance has been invaluable, Lady Beatrice, Holmes stated, his tone conveying sincere gratitude. You have provided the human context that the ciphers alone could not. Watson, he turned to me, a new decisiveness in his voice that brooked no argument. Prepare for a journey. It seems our investigation must take us north, to the very heart of these simmering tensions, deduced Sherlock Holmes. North, the word hung in the air, filled with the promise of misty glens, and I suspected hidden dangers. The puzzle of the Highland Clearances cipher drew us inexorably towards its source. I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation, mingled with foreboding, as we departed Lady Foxglove's elegant Mayfair drawing-room. Back on the bustling London streets, the clatter of hooves and carriage wheels asserted their familiar presence. The insights gleaned from Lady Foxglove had lent a new, more somber dimension to our undertaking. As the Great Northern Express thundered northwards, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on iron rails accompanied my thoughts. The verdant fields of England gradually gave way to sterner, more elemental landscapes. The air itself seemed to grow crisper, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as we crossed the border into Scotland. Holmes, for his part, had been largely silent since our departure from King's Cross, his hawk-like profile silhouetted against the fleeting scenery, his mind evidently lost in the coils of this perplexing affair. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and thoughtful. "Observe, Watson, how the very character of the land changes. It breeds a different sort of man, one accustomed to hardship, fiercely loyal to his own. We must tread with care here," observed Sherlock Holmes. Our destination was the small coastal village of Inverquois, nestled precariously between the grey, unforgiving sea and the brooding hills. As our hired trap rattled over the uneven track leading from the station, a keen wind whipped at us, carrying the cries of unseen gulls and the distant, mournful sigh of what might have been a foghorn. The village itself, when it came into view, was a huddled collection of stone cottages, smoke curling thinly from their chimneys, presenting an aspect both hardy and somewhat forlorn. A profound quiet lay upon the place, broken only by the crash of waves upon a shingle beach nearby. Our initial inquiries at the modest local inn, the Seafarer's Rest, were met with a reserve that bordered on suspicion. The innkeeper, a burly man with watchful eyes, was a study in taciturnity. To my question about rooms, he offered a curt, "Aye, we've rooms," his Gaelic lilt failing to soften the grudging tone. Further attempts at conversation were met with similar brevity, each reply a carefully constructed dead end, offering no purchase for our inquiries. Other patrons, fishermen by their weathered appearance, merely glanced at us from beneath lowered brows before returning to their low, guttural conversation, a murmur that ceased abruptly if we drew too near. The air hung heavy with unspoken sentiments, a palpable tension that even the sharp sense of salt and peat smoke couldn't mask. "They seem a rather insular folk, Holmes," I remarked, as we later stood surveying the windswept harbor where a few fishing boats bobbed restlessly. Dr. John Watson replied. He nodded, his gaze sweeping the length of the small quay. "Insular, Watson, perhaps, but I'd wager cautious is more apt. Our London accents stick out like a sore thumb in these parts, and our purpose, vague as we've kept it, is bound to set tongues wagging. Did you observe the way young Jamie, the pot boy, ceased his whistling of Scots wha hey the moment he perceived our attention?" Sherlock Holmes responded. I confessed I had not. It was a small detail, yet illustrative of the undercurrents Holmes so readily perceived. Later that afternoon, as we walked the cliff path that offered a commanding view of the nearby naval installation, Holmes suddenly gripped my arm. His usually impassive face was alight with keen interest. Below us, the installation sprawled across a promontory, a stark geometry of grey stone and corrugated iron against the wild heather. A high wire fence, topped with cruel barbs, delineated its perimeter. We could discern long, low barrack blocks, a larger administrative building flying the Union Jack, and several windowless storehouses. A concrete jetty extended into the choppy waters of the Firth, though no major vessels were currently berthed, only a few smaller patrol craft. A tall wireless mast hummed faintly in the wind, a modern sentinel overlooking the older, more weathered watchtowers positioned at strategic points along the cliff edge. It was a grim, functional bastion, clearly vital to the Empire's maritime strength, and its presence here lent a palpable weight to Mycroft's concerns. Below us, at a discreet distance from the main naval compound, yet clearly on government land, stood two figures in conversation. One I recognized from Mycroft's descriptions and a supplied photograph. Lieutenant Davies, the naval attaché whose loyalty had been questioned. His companion was a civilian, rough-hewn and dressed in local attire, his gestures animated. Their meeting had an air of secrecy, heads inclined as they shared confidences clearly not meant for other ears. A moment later, they parted, Davies heading back towards the base, his companion melting into the gorse and bracken with surprising swiftness. His voice was a sharp exhalation. Curious, Watson, most curious. Lieutenant Davies cultivating local acquaintances in so clandestine a manner. The plot, as they say, thickens with every gust of this Highland wind. Sherlock Holmes noted. The encounter cast a more sinister light upon the quiet village. Even the rhythmic slap of halyards against a distant mast seemed to carry a note of warning. Holmes spent the remainder of the daylight hours in silent contemplation, his brow furrowed. I knew that look. His mind was piecing together the disparate fragments we had gathered. The reticence of these villagers, Watson, he said abruptly as dusk began to settle, the lights of the cottages pricking the gloom, is not mere shyness. It is the guarded silence of a community that shares a secret, or perhaps a common fear. We are told of a resurgent nationalism, of historical grievances. It would seem Lieutenant Davies is not the only one with divided loyalties. There is talk in the inn of a Mr. Angus MacLeod, a former schoolmaster, a man of strong opinions, and I gather considerable local influence. It is with him, I think, that our inquiries must continue on the morrow. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The prospect of confronting this MacLeod, a man who already sounded formidable, filled me with a mixture of apprehension and the familiar thrill of the chase. The wind howled a little louder around the eaves of the inn, a fitting overture, it seemed, to the complexities that lay ahead. Following our disquieting observation by the naval yard, Holmes secured an interview with Angus MacLeod, a name prominent in our early inquiries. His dwelling was a modest stone cottage, hunkered low against the persistent Highland wind. This wind whistled a low, mournful dirge around the eaves as we approached. Holmes's sharp rap on the weathered timber door echoed briefly before it was opened. Angus MacLeod himself stood before us, a man of perhaps 50 years, his frame spare but erect. His eyes, however, held a fire that belied the silver in his dark hair, the eyes of an enthusiast, perhaps a zealot. A subtle scent of peat smoke and old books greeted us from within. His voice was calm, yet carried an edge of authority. Mr. Angus MacLeod, I presume. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. Watson. We are looking into matters of some local import, and were told you might possess a unique perspective, declared Sherlock Holmes. His voice, a resonant baritone with the distinct Highland lilt, was welcoming, yet a certain weariness lined his tone. Indeed, I am he. Please come in from the wind. Any perspective I have is born of this land and its sorrows, gentlemen, Angus MacLeod said. We were ushered into a small, book-lined room. A meager fire sputtered in the hearth, its light casting dancing shadows on the walls. MacLeod gestured to two simple wooden chairs. The floorboards creaked softly beneath our tread as we seated ourselves. We understand you are a keen student of Highland history, Mr. MacLeod, particularly the more painful episodes, replied Sherlock Holmes. MacLeod's expression tightened, the fire in his eyes flaring. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, thick with emotion. Painful, MacLeod's voice grew hoarse with emotion. I tease a mild word, Mr. Holmes. My own folk were driven out, their croft burned for sheep. They watched it all from a barren hill, babes in arms. That's no mere history, sir. It's a wound in every true Scot's soul, answered Angus MacLeod. His passionate words hung in the air. For a moment, the fire's crackle was the only sound. I could not help but be moved by his evident sincerity, by the raw grief still resonating in his voice after generations. A terrible tragedy, Mr. MacLeod. One can only imagine the bitterness it engendered, commented Dr. John Watson. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. Bitterness is the milk we were weaned on, and some of us believe it is time Scotland stood on her own feet, free from a grip that has too often been careless or cruel. Is that what you truly came to ask, Mr. Holmes, about our nationalist sentiments? His tone held a challenge, answered Angus MacLeod. His own voice remained even, almost detached. Such sentiments, when deeply held, can lead men to contemplate significant actions, particularly when strategic assets are nearby. The coast here, for instance, is vital for naval movements. Protecting it must be a complex affair, declared Sherlock Holmes. A flicker of something unreadable crossed MacLeod's face. Complex indeed, especially with the morning fog that often cloaks the Firth. Why, only a fool would attempt to patrol near the Black Isle shoals before 10 when the currents shift. Any vessel hugging the northern channel before then risks, he paused, a sudden awareness dawning in his eyes, his voice losing some of its confident flow. Remarked Angus MacLeod. I saw Holmes's eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. The mention of a specific time, linked to currents and patrol routes near a sensitive area, was a minute detail. It was information a civilian schoolmaster would be unlikely to know with such precision. The air in the small room seemed to grow colder, despite the struggling fire. He changed tacks smoothly, his voice betraying nothing. A keen observation of local conditions, Mr. MacLeod. You paint a vivid picture of the challenges. We must not take up more of your valuable time, explained Sherlock Holmes. Soon after we took our leave, the wind seeming to push us from the cottage. Once out of earshot, only the rhythmic crunch of our boots on the path broke the silence. Then Holmes spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. Our schoolmaster knows more of naval timetables than of pedagogy, Watson. That reference to the Black Isle shoals and the 10 o'clock current was no idle fisherman's tale. It was specific, tactical, far too specific, replied Sherlock Holmes. You believe he is directly involved then, Holmes, not just a sympathizer, Dr. John Watson said. His gaze was fixed on the brooding hills around us, scarred by the remnants of old crofts. His passion is genuine, I grant you, but knowledge of that nature is not gleaned from historical texts alone. No, Watson, Mr. MacLeod's tale is not yet fully told. I suspect the land itself, these silent glens that witness the clearances, may hold further secrets. We shall explore them anon, explained Sherlock Holmes. A chill ran through me as Holmes spoke, his words hinting at deeper mysteries hidden in the very earth of this troubled yet beautiful land. Like the sorrows MacLeod had described, I sensed we were about to unearth long-buried truths. The schoolmaster MacLeod's unguarded remark concerning the naval patrol routes had hung in the air of our London rooms long after he had departed. It was a thread, Holmes had declared, that must be tugged. And so, within days, we found ourselves amidst the stark, wind-swept grandeur of the Scottish Highlands. The air was sharp with the tang of peat, the distant, mournful cry of a curlew echoing across the vast, undulating landscape of purple heather and grey rock. Our carriage wheels crunched over the rough track, a rhythmic counterpoint to the sighing wind that seemed to carry the sorrows of centuries. His voice, keen as the Highland air, cut through my reverie. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the landscape. "This terrain, so seemingly desolate, offers a multitude of hidden approaches to the coast. A man with MacLeod's professed historical interests might know the old drove roads, but his knowledge of sea lanes—" He paused meaningfully. "That speaks of a more contemporary application," observed Sherlock Holmes. Our immediate destination was a cluster of abandoned crofts, skeletal remains of a forgotten community nestled in a shallow glen. The very air seemed heavy with unspoken history. The silence here was profound. Occasionally, a hardy sheep bleated, and the wind rustled through dry bracken. Roofless walls stood like weathered tombstones, doorways gaping blackly. In the stillness, one could almost hear the ghostly echoes of lives abruptly ended, a testament to the clearances MacLeod had spoken of with such simmering resentment. As we picked our way through the ruins, an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and weather, emerged from behind a tumble-down sheepfold. He leaned heavily on a shepherd's crook, his eyes, though faded, holding a deep, watchful quality. He greeted us in Gaelic, then switched to a heavily accented English when Holmes addressed him. His voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "Ye'll be strangers to these parts. Not many come to look upon such sorrowful sights," replied Highland local. "We are students of history, my good man," Holmes replied, his tone courteous, "and of the tales that cling to such places. Every stone here must have a story," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The old man nodded slowly, a flicker of something pride, perhaps, or ancient pain in his gaze. He spoke of families driven from the land, of hardship and resilience. Then, as the light began to fade, casting long shadows that danced with the ruins, he mentioned a place nearby, his voice dropping. "If it's old tales ye seek, then perhaps ye have heard of Uam Nan Arsnad, the Whispering Cove. A place of smugglers it was in my grandsire's time. The sea speaks strangely there, they say, and secrets are easily kept," Highland local said. Holmes's eyes gleamed. After a few more carefully phrased questions and a silver coin pressed into the old man's calloused palm, we took our leave, the Highlander's directions clear in Holmes's mind. The old man's tale of the Whispering Cove resonated with a peculiar insistence. A smuggler's haunt, he had called it. As we set off, following the vague track he had indicated, I pondered how such a place, steeped in local legend, might serve a more modern, sinister purpose, particularly given its potential for unobserved access to the coast, far from the prying eyes of any regular naval patrol. The terrain grew wilder, the path less distinct, leading us ever closer to the restless sea. As we navigated the increasingly difficult terrain towards the sea, Holmes suddenly paused. His voice was low, yet carried clearly over the sigh of the wind as he gestured towards the almost invisible path. "Mark how this track all but vanishes, Watson. An ideal approach for those wishing to avoid notice, particularly from any naval patrol vessel operating along this coastline. A smuggler's instinct for secrecy is timeless, it seems, and perhaps readily adaptable to more nefarious purposes," observed Sherlock Holmes. And indeed, the cove soon revealed itself, a narrow, rock-strewn inlet, accessible only by a treacherous descent. The path was barely visible, winding steeply downwards towards the shore. The tide was out, exposing seaweed-slicked stones and the dark mouths of several small caves. The air was thick with the smell of brine and damp rock. The only sound was the suck and gurgle of water amongst the crevices, a sound that, in the stillness, did indeed resemble hushed, conspiratorial whispers. Holmes moved with surprising agility over the uneven ground, his gaze sweeping every detail. He paused near the largest of the cave openings, partially obscured by a fall of rock. He bent low, examining something at his feet. I heard the scrape of his boot as he dislodged a small stone. He straightened, holding a small, metallic object between his fingers. Our Highlander spoke of smugglers of old, Watson, but this, I fancy, is of a more recent vintage. His voice was tight with discovery. "Observe the fresh scoring on this seemingly ancient marker stone by the cave entrance, not weathering, but the work of a modern tool. And this," he held up the object, "is a brass button, likely from a waterproof coat, of a make not more than a year old. Dropped, I surmise, by one who is no stranger to this supposedly forgotten cove," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed, peering at the button. "So recent a make. You mean this legend is being repurposed by these very conspirators we seek?" wondered Dr. John Watson. "Precisely. An ideal rendezvous, Watson. Secluded, difficult to observe from the sea, and thus well away from the standard naval patrol routes. Steeped in local lore that provides a natural camouflage for unusual activity. and known only to a few. The whispers in this cove are no longer those of ancient smugglers, but of modern conspirators. Our next task is to discover who is privy to these current secrets and how their messages are carried beyond these desolate shores, stated Sherlock Holmes. As we made our way back up the difficult path, the wind seemed to pick up, its mournful sigh now carrying a more sinister undertone. The Whispering Cove, a place of folklore, had yielded a tangible link to the present danger. Holmes was already turning his mind to the channels of communication, and I sensed our investigation was about to draw closer to the heart of the small community, and perhaps to the telegraph wires that connected it to the wider world. The Highland chill clung to us as we departed the Whispering Cove, its legend now resonating with a sinister, immediate significance. Holmes strode on in silence, his gaze on the grey, brooding landscape before turning to me, a familiar glint of purpose in his eyes. His voice was brisk, cutting through the stillness. The threads of this conspiracy, Watson, are woven through communication. Our next port of call must be the village telegraph office. It is there, I suspect, we shall find a knot that needs untangling, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The telegraph office, a modest stone building beside the general merchants, greeted us with the persistent, rhythmic clicking from within like an industrious metallic insect. A light drizzle slicked the cobbled path to its door. Inside, Miss Maura MacDonald bent over a ledger, the air close with the faint scent of ink and damp wool. He addressed her with a courteous, almost gentle inclination of his head. Miss MacDonald, I believe. We are making some inquiries concerning local matters and hoped you might spare us a moment, deduced Sherlock Holmes. She looked up, her eyes, a startling shade of blue, widened almost imperceptibly. Her fingers, I noted, stilled upon the page. Her reply was soft, with the characteristic lilt of the Highlands. "Aye, sir, if I can be of assistance," said Maura MacDonald. Holmes moved closer to the counter, his gaze sweeping the small office before returning to her. The relentless tap-tap-tapping of the telegraph instrument formed an unsettling counterpoint to the quiet intensity of his scrutiny. His tone remained mild, yet there was an undeniable undercurrent of steel. "Miss MacDonald, you are a native of these parts, I understand. Familiar with its history, its people, its particular loyalties." He paused, then added, quite deliberately, "And I observe a purveyor of a rather distinctive method for securing your bundles of outgoing telegram forms. A double constrictor knot, if I am not mistaken," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The color drained from Maura MacDonald's face. Her hand flew to her throat, fingers trembling against the pale skin. I recalled Holmes, with his encyclopedic knowledge of trifles, mentioning such a knot in connection with a piece of twine he had retrieved near the Whispering Cove, a detail I had dismissed at the time. I do not know what you mean, sir," remarked Maura MacDonald. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more confidential pitch, though no less firm. "My dear Miss MacDonald, the knot is uncommon. The same knot secured a package found near a known meeting place of those who harbor strong feelings about the past. It is a small thing, perhaps, but in our profession, it is often the smallest things that shout the loudest. You are caught, I fear, between your duty and your sympathies," Sherlock Holmes said. Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank onto a nearby stool, her composure utterly shattered. The clicking of the telegraph seemed to mark her distress. For a long moment, the only sound was her quiet, choked sob. Her words, when they came, were fraught with an anguish that was plain to see. They spoke of justice, sir," answered Maura MacDonald. Her voice quavered. "Of righting old wrongs. My own great-grandmother was driven from her home, her croft burned." She paused, swallowing hard. I only passed messages. I never thought," Maura MacDonald answered. She confessed then, her story tumbling out in a torrent of fear and misplaced loyalty. She described the coded messages, the prearranged signals, the clandestine nature of their communications. Most alarmingly, she spoke of certain dispatches that detailed naval patrols and the schedules of supply ships with an accuracy that had begun to trouble her deeply. Her voice trembled as she recounted this. Some of the information, it was too precise, as if it came from someone within the Admiralty itself, or at least with access to their private channels. It frightened me, sir, truly it did. They said it was for Scotland, but, replied Moira MacDonald. His expression softened fractionally, a rare occurrence. And these messages, Miss MacDonald, to whom were the most sensitive ones ultimately directed? Where is the hub of this network? Sherlock Holmes responded. She hesitated, twisting a loose thread on her apron. The decision warred on her features. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of generations of sorrow, she looked up. Her voice was low, resolute now. The main planning, the meetings where decisions are made, they happen in Glasgow. There is a man there, a Mr. Angus MacLeod, who leads them. He is expecting word soon about a significant action, answered Moira MacDonald. Holmes nodded slowly, absorbing this crucial information. The path ahead, though perilous, was clearer. After offering counsel to the distraught Miss MacDonald, we departed. The drizzle had ceased, yet the Highland air remained heavy, charged with unspoken secrets and the grim promise of Glasgow's industrial heart. The information gleaned from the troubled telegraphist, Moira MacDonald, had set our course firmly towards Glasgow. The chill of the Scottish autumn seemed to seep into the very carriage as the train bore us northwards. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels upon the rails, a constant, metallic song, punctuated by the occasional mournful cry of the steam whistle. Holmes, for his part, was uncharacteristically silent, his gaze fixed upon the fleeting landscape, though I knew his mind was far from idle, sifting through the meager facts we possessed. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and thoughtful. Glasgow, Watson, a city of industry, of shadows, and if Miss MacDonald's fears are well-founded, of sedition. Mycroft's tendrils, thankfully, extend even to these northern warrens, explained Sherlock Holmes. Upon our arrival, the Glasgow air was thick with the acrid scent of coal smoke, and the insistent, distant clang of hammers on steel from the shipyards, a symphony of industry. True to Holmes's assertion, a discreet message awaited him at our modest lodgings. Within the hour, we were met by a wiry, sharp-eyed fellow, his voice a low Glasgow burr, whose deferential manner belied a certain shrewdness. Under his guidance, we were soon transformed. He provided us with coarse, heavy woolen trousers, patched in several places and smelling faintly of brine and old machinery, thick, collarless shirts of a faded, indeterminate grey, and stout, well-worn work boots, their leather scuffed and bearing traces of mud and tar. To complete the effect, we donned nondescript flat caps pulled low, and Holmes even smeared a touch of grime upon his own cheekbones, advising me to adopt a slight stoop to better fit the part of men accustomed to heavy labor. Our own more refined footwear and attire were bundled away. Thus disguised, our boots now echoed with a convincing weight on the cobbled streets as we melted into the grimy backdrop of the city's less salubrious quarters. Our informant led us to a dilapidated tenement, its windows dark and forbidding, the silence within contrasting with the muffled hubbub from the public house of ill repute directly opposite. From a vacant upper room, its grimy window affording a narrow, shadowed view, we were to observe. An excellent vantage point, he murmured, his eyes already scanning the street below. The establishment opposite Watson is known as the Thistle and Shamrock. A curious juxtaposition of symbols, would you not agree? Suggestive, perhaps, of the company it keeps, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. As dusk settled, the gaslit street cast long, dancing shadows. The clop of boots on cobblestones announced the arrival of men, singly or in pairs, their faces obscured by the gathering gloom. Their footsteps, some heavy, some light, echoed briefly before they slipped into the public house with a furtiveness that spoke volumes, the pub door groaning softly with each entry. Through a gap in the grimy curtains opposite, we could discern a back room, dimly lit by what appeared to be an oil lamp. The low, indistinct murmur of voices, punctuated occasionally by a sudden, gruff laugh or the sharp clink of glasses, drifted across the narrow street. We could not make out individual words at first, but the tone was earnest, at times heated, like the simmering of a pot about to boil. An hour passed in this silent, cramped vigil. Then the scrape of a chair from across the way, followed by the door to the back room opening slightly wider, and a man of commanding presence, his voice carrying a distinct, resonant Highland burr, rose to speak. His words, though somewhat muffled by the distance and the glass, became clearer. "The shipyards at Clydebank," remarked Scottish nationalist, muffled. The man's voice rose with passion. "A message must be sent. The Crown must understand that Scotland will not be forever yoked to their will," answered Scottish nationalist, muffled. Another voice, this one with a softer, more lyrical lilt that Holmes's raised eyebrow identified for me as Irish, chimed in. "Ah, be assured now, our friends are indeed prepared to offer material assistance, and gladly so. For the sacred cause of liberty, sure, it knows no borders, no boundaries at all, at all. Disruption to their mighty fleet, d'ye see, is a direct blow against their tyranny." Fenian representative, muffled, said. Holmes gripped my arm, his fingers like steel. The implications were chilling. Sabotage of vital naval infrastructure, aided and abetted by Fenian sympathisers. This was no mere nationalist outcry. It was a plot that struck at the Empire's maritime strength. His whisper was barely audible. "Naval infrastructure, Watson, and Fenian involvement. The stakes are higher than even Mycroft anticipated. We have what we came for. It is time to withdraw before our presence is noted," Sherlock Holmes said. As if on cue, a sudden commotion erupted in the street below. Loud shouts, the frantic pound of running feet on the cobbles, and then the sharp, unmistakable shattering of glass. Our local contact, it seemed, had arranged a most timely diversion. Under the cover of the ensuing chaos, a cacophony of alarm and confusion, we slipped from our hiding place, our own soft-soled shoes making little sound as we navigated the darkened alleyways, the sounds of the disturbance fading behind us. Holmes carried with him a small, folded paper he had retrieved from the dusty floor of our observation post, seemingly dropped by our informant. "That was remarkably well timed," I observed, my breath still coming a little fast. Dr. John Watson inquired. "Indeed, Mycroft's man is efficient, but the true work begins now, Watson. We have heard their intent. Now we must decipher their methods and, most crucially, the full extent of their network. This document," he tapped the paper in his coat, "may yet provide the key," Sherlock Holmes said. The train journey back to London was filled with a grim purpose. The rhythmic clickety-clack of the wheels, a sombre counterpoint to my thoughts. The hushed, determined whispers in that Glasgow public house echoed in my mind, a prelude, I feared, to a storm that threatened to break upon our shores. Holmes, I knew, would soon be immersed in the complex dance of cryptography, seeking the truth hidden within their clandestine communications. The chill of our Glasgow adventure had scarcely left my bones before Holmes plunged us back into the intellectual warmth of our Baker Street rooms. The familiar scent of his strong tobacco hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sharper, more acrid tang of chemicals from the corner where his test tubes and beakers stood in ordered disarray. A cheerful fire crackled in the grate, its warmth a welcome bulwark against the November gloom that pressed against the window panes, accompanied by the occasional sigh of wind around the eaves. Yet these domestic sounds were but a counterpoint to the intense quietude of Holmes's concentration. He was hunched over the table, a veritable sea of documents spread before him. The notes we had painstakingly acquired, transcripts from Mycroft, and most prominently, the rather grimy slip of paper we had retrieved from the periphery of that clandestine meeting in Glasgow. The gas lamp hissed softly, casting a focused yellow light upon his hawk-like features as he peered through his lens, occasionally making a swift annotation with a finely sharpened pencil. The scrape of graphite on paper and the steady tick-tock of the mantelpiece clock were the only sounds for a long while. His voice, when it finally came, was low but charged with an electric energy. "Ah, Watson, the threads are weaving themselves into a pattern most discernible. Cast your eye upon this phrasing, a supposed call to arms, ostensibly rooted in 18th century grievances," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I leaned closer, my gaze following his pointing finger. The script was archaic, yet something about the sentiment felt manufactured. Anachronisms, my dear fellow. Subtle, yet undeniable. This particular turn of phrase concerning land rights, for instance, only came into common usage following reforms well into the next century. And the paper itself, he held the Glasgow fragment delicately. Note the watermark, almost invisible to the naked eye. A crude hop. I have seen its twin before, on seditious pamphlets circulated by certain Fenian elements in the East End. Fenians, I exclaimed, the word catching in my throat. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Good Lord, Holmes, then this is far more than mere Scottish discontent. It has tendrils reaching into Ireland itself, remarked Dr. John Watson. His smile was thin. Indeed, but the most compelling piece of evidence lies not in what is written, but with what it is written. You recall the samples of specialized naval ink Mycroft furnished us with, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He gestured towards his chemical bench. A microscope stood ready, a slide already prepared. Beside it, a small vial of dark, viscous fluid Mycroft's contribution gleamed faintly. Holmes had evidently been at work, whilst I had briefly rested. I have subjected a minute's scraping from this Glasgow message to both microscopic and chemical analysis. The comparison is beyond doubt, Watson. The very makeup of this ink, its precise chemical signature, is an exact match for the special ink Mycroft provided. It is the very same used only for the Admiralty's most secret charts and documents. This message was penned by someone with access to restricted naval supplies. The implications struck me like a thunderbolt. Here was a nationalist plot, Fenian involvement, and now unmistakable evidence of a traitor within the very heart of the Royal Navy. Good heavens, Holmes. Then our suspicions regarding Lieutenant Davies, commented Dr. John Watson. He nodded, his eyes glinting with a steely light. Are strongly corroborated. Furthermore, the decoded messages, and I believe I have now broken the cipher, completely lay out precise methods for disrupting our fleet's signals and even for sinking our ships. These are not vague threats, Watson. They are detailed instructions that only an officer with direct, expert knowledge of our modern warships could possibly write. The language is chillingly specific and brutally effective, observed Sherlock Holmes. He rose then, pacing the length of the room, the floorboards creaking faintly under his measured tread. The sounds of a distant hansom cab, its wheels clattering on the wet cobbles, drifted in from Baker Street. This is no mere rabble-rousing, Watson. We are confronted by a meticulously planned conspiracy, a hydra with many heads, embittered nationalists, Irish separatists, and most dangerously, a traitor within the senior service itself. They intend to strike a blow that will resonate throughout the empire. A silence fell, heavy and oppressive with the weight of his words. The crackling fire seemed to falter for a moment, its cheerful dance subdued. A shiver, entirely unrelated to the November air, traced its icy way down my spine. The full, terrifying scope of the danger was now laid bare before me. Then we must act, Holmes, and swiftly. But where is this blow to fall? Commented Dr. John Watson. He stopped his pacing, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of our room. The decoded messages point to a primary target, a linchpin of our naval strength in the north. There is no time to lose. Our next journey, Watson, will be one of considerable urgency, observed Sherlock Holmes. No sooner had Holmes laid bare the conspiracy and identified the Admiralty traitor than we were hurtling northwards. The night express to Edinburgh thundered through sleeping counties, its rails clattering a rhythmic drumbeat to our urgent mission. Inspector Mackenzie, his Highland face grim, stared into the darkness. Holmes, however, seemed energized, his eyes bright, his mind racing ahead of the straining locomotive, its whistle periodically shrieking into the night. His voice was calm, yet held an underlying tension. The decoded messages, Watson, were quite specific. The target is strategically vital, and the window for their action is perilously narrow, declared Sherlock Holmes. Dawn broke as our carriage approached the naval installation, its wheels groaning on the rough coastal road. The eastern sky, painted in hues of grey and troubled rose, framed the silhouette of our destination. The air carried the tang of salt and coal smoke, the distant clang of metal, and the mournful cries of gulls. The base commander, a portly captain with a chest full of ribbons, received us as coldly as the morning air. He listened to Holmes's stark warnings with disbelief, arms crossed, his foot tapping impatiently on the polished office floor. "Mr. Holmes," the commander said, his voice clipped and dismissive, "while I appreciate the zeal of the civilian detective, this is a secure naval facility. The notion of saboteurs operating within these walls is, frankly, preposterous," answered Naval Commander. Holmes met his gaze unflinchingly, his tone sharpening. "Commander, your incredulity is understandable, but it is dangerously misplaced. I possess evidence, corroborated by Mr. Mycroft Holmes of the Diogenes Club and Inspector Mackenzie here, of a plot to cripple this very installation before the high tide this morning." The cipher spoke of silencing key infrastructure. "The lives of your men, and indeed the security of this coastline, depend upon your immediate cooperation," replied Sherlock Holmes. There was a moment of charged silence, broken only by the ticking of a large chronometer on the wall. The commander's eyes flickered towards Mackenzie, who gave a curt, affirmative nod. Reluctantly, it seemed, the officer acquiesced. He spoke with a sigh, his voice now laced with grudging concern. "Very well, Mr. Holmes, show me what you propose, but any disruption to naval routine must be justified," Naval Commander said. Led by the now perturbed commander and a few ratings, we moved swiftly through echoing corridors and across windswept yards. The wind whistled through rigging, and our hurried footsteps echoed loudly in the tense quiet. Holmes, naturally, spotted the subtle signs. Freshly disturbed gravel near a perimeter fence, the faint, unmistakable scent of unrefined oil near the critical pumping station for the main dry dock. He pointed, his voice low and urgent. "There, Watson, the lock on that access hatch shows signs of recent tampering. No workman would be so clumsy," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A muffled thud from within the station, followed by a hushed, urgent voice speaking in what I took to be Gaelic, confirmed our fears. Mackenzie, his hand instinctively moving towards his coat pocket, gave Holmes a grim nod. The commander's face was now a mask of alarm. The confrontation was brief and desperate. As we burst in, two shadowy figures, startled, frantically tried to ignite a potent explosive device nestled amongst the machinery. One lunged for a lever. Mackenzie, surprisingly fast, intercepted him with a grunt of effort. Holmes confronted the other, his lean frame powerful as he twisted the man's arm, forcing him to drop a lit fuse. It hissed on the damp stone floor before I stamped it out with my heel. Once the saboteurs were secured, their faces grim and unyielding, Holmes swiftly examined their belongings. From one man's pocket, he retrieved a small, water-stained booklet. He held it up, his eyes glinting with renewed intensity. A tide table, Watson, and a schedule for the steam packet the Sea Serpent, departing Leith in under 2 hours. It appears our primary conspirator, the one who furnished them with such precise naval intelligence, has arranged his escape. Mackenzie's voice was tight with resolve. Then we must make for the port with all haste, Mr. Holmes. There is no time to lose. Inspector Mackenzie answered. Indeed, the race was far from over. The immediate danger to the installation had been averted, but the architect of this treachery was still at large, and the grey waters of the Firth of Forth beckoned towards a final, desperate encounter. The choppy waters of the Firth of Forth slapped against the hull of our commandeered launch as we drew alongside the shadowy bulk of the steamship, the Sea Serpent. A chill wind, carrying the tang of salt and the distant cry of gulls, whipped at our faces. The metallic clang of our launch, bumping the larger vessel, echoed briefly. Above, the vessel's funnel emitted a plume of dark smoke, staining the grey morning sky. The thrum of its engines was a low, insistent pulse in the air, a rhythmic vibration felt even through the soles of our boots. Holmes, his face set and grim, was first to grasp the rope ladder flung down by a confederate of Inspector Mackenzie's, already aboard. The rough hemp of the ladder scraped against the ship's side as he ascended. His voice, though low, carried clearly above the chugging of the steamship's machinery. Swiftly, Watson, time is not our ally, observed Sherlock Holmes. I followed, my boots thudding softly on the wooden rungs as I found purchase on the swaying ladder. The groan of the rope under my weight was a minor counterpoint to the ever-present engine thrum. Once on deck, the scene that greeted us was one of tense anticipation. A small group of men, their faces hard and resolute, stood clustered near the stern, their low, urgent murmurs barely audible above the wind. One, a powerfully built man with a grim set to his jaw, conspicuously displayed the butt of a heavy revolver tucked into his belt. At their head, I recognized the fiery countenance of Angus MacLeod, his eyes blazing with a zealot's light. Beside him, a man in the uniform of a naval lieutenant stood stiffly, his gaze averted. The air crackled with palpable menace. The only other sounds the rhythmic creak of the ship's timbers and the ceaseless sigh of the wind through the rigging. "Ark, so it's you, Mr. Holmes. You and your London hounds have sniffed us out, have ye? It changes nothing, I tell ye. The flame of Scottish liberty will not be so easily extinguished." Angus MacLeod replied. Holmes stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The liberty to endanger the lives of thousands, MacLeod, to invite chaos and foreign interference, a curious interpretation of freedom. His eyes then flickered to the naval officer. "And you, Lieutenant Davies, a man sworn to protect the crown, now consorting with those who would see it fractured. Your increasingly erratic behavior these past weeks, your clandestine meetings, they painted a rather clear picture for one who knew where to look," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Lieutenant Davies flinched as if struck, his face paling. A sharp intake of breath was audible from him. He opened his mouth, a tremor in his voice betraying the battle within him, and managed a few halting words. "MacLeod. Aye, this was not what I envisioned. Not this," said Lieutenant Davies. MacLeod cut him off with a sharp, impatient gesture, his voice ringing with conviction. "Hold your tongue, Lieutenant. Davies is a true Scot, a patriot still, unlike those who grovel to Westminster, man." His hand dropped to the pistol at his own hip, a clear, if unspoken, warning. "Our message will still be sent. Our allies await the signal, and we will not be taken without a reckoning," Angus MacLeod answered. A thin smile touched Holmes's lips. "Ah, the signal. A rather ingenious heliograph, I presume, intended for a sympathiser on Inchkeith. Unfortunately for your plans, Lieutenant Davies was not as discreet with his practice transmissions as he might have hoped. The pattern was predictable." Holmes paused, his gaze unwavering. "So predictable, in fact, that I took the liberty of arranging a rather more official reception for your signal." Instead of allies, MacLeod, you will find you have summoned His Majesty's Navy, deduced Sherlock Holmes. A collective gasp went through MacLeod's men. Davies looked utterly broken, his shoulders slumping. MacLeod stared at Holmes, his bravado visibly crumbling, replaced by a stunned fury. Then we heard it, the distant, rhythmic throb of powerful engines, growing steadily louder from the east. It was a sound that confirmed Holmes's startling assertion and sent a chill through us all. "Holmes, you anticipated even this," I murmured, astounded. Wondered Dr. John Watson. He replied with a hint of weariness in his tone. "Their entire enterprise, Watson, hinged upon secrecy and a swift, deniable strike." Davies' access was key, but his nervousness made him careless. He sought reassurance through repeated, albeit coded, communications. A man under such strain invariably falls into routine. Their escape route, too, relied on this specific vessel and its supposed anonymity. A few discreet inquiries yesterday confirmed my suspicions about its true capabilities and likely heading should their primary plan falter. He turned back to MacLeod. "The game, I fear, is over," declared Sherlock Holmes, as the approaching naval cutter became visible, its formidable silhouette cutting through the morning mist, the wash from its bow waves slapping audibly against our own vessel. The fight seemed to drain from the conspirators. Their muttered curses and resigned sighs filled the air. Inspector Mackenzie and his men, emerging from their positions with the quiet efficiency of practiced officers, moved to secure the would-be saboteurs. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs was a definitive sound in the sudden relative quiet, punctuated only by the lapping of water and the distant engines. Holmes watched them, his expression thoughtful, the sea breeze ruffling his hair, before turning to me. His voice was quiet now, almost reflective. "A messy business, Watson, and one, I suspect, that will require a rather detailed explanation for my brother Mycroft," explained Sherlock Holmes. The biting winds of the Firth of Forth had yielded to London's familiar, smoky embrace. The immediate peril aboard the steamship had passed, thanks to Holmes's decisive action. Yet a certain gravity clung to us. We sensed the echoes of the Highland Clearances Cipher affair would resonate for some time. A few days later, with this weight on my mind, I accompanied Holmes to the Diogenes Club. His brother Mycroft's summons had been typically terse and unavoidable. The funereal quiet of that peculiar institution seemed even more profound than usual. The only sounds were the rustle of a distant newspaper as a member turned a page, and the faint, rhythmic tick of a grand clock in the hall. Mycroft finally spoke. His voice was a dry, dispassionate murmur like the rustling of official documents. "The immediate threat to naval security is contained, Sherlock. Lieutenant Davies will face the full consequences. The more intricate matter of MacLeod and his sympathisers is being handled with appropriate discretion." Mycroft Holmes answered. My friend had been gazing out at the grey London sky. He turned his sharp eyes upon his brother. "Discretion, Mycroft, or suppression. There is a difference. MacLeod's grievances were not conjured from thin air, even if his methods were misguided," Sherlock Holmes said. Mycroft Holmes offered a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. That small gesture spoke volumes. It hinted at the immense burdens he carried for the Empire's governance. "The stability of the realm, brother, often necessitates unpalatable choices. We cannot allow historical wounds to fester into present dangers. The Foreign Office is drafting protocols to address the sensitivities this affair has highlighted," said Mycroft Holmes. Our next visit was to Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Her Mayfair residence offered a stark contrast to the Diogenes Club. A cheerful fire crackled in the hearth. The faint scent of beeswax and roses hung in the air. We heard the gentle clink of porcelain as she poured tea. Lady Beatrice's voice, always gracious, held a note of sombre reflection. "I confess, Mr. Holmes, this entire business has troubled me deeply. My own ancestors. Well, their hands were not entirely clean regarding the clearances. It is a heavy legacy, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes replied, his tone softening slightly. Indeed, Lady Beatrice, history is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, necessity, and profound injustice. MacLeod saw only one pattern in it, retribution. He failed to see that the empire, for all its flaws, can also be a vessel of progress, a certain order. Sherlock Holmes said. I watched Holmes as he spoke. His gaze was fixed upon the dancing flames. He seemed to be wrestling with the very ideas he expressed. He continued, turning to me. The rise of such fervent nationalism, Watson, is a phenomenon I suspect we shall see more of. When men feel their identity or history is threatened or ignored, they will inevitably seek to reclaim it. Sometimes this reclamation takes desperate measures. The challenge for any great power is to accommodate these aspirations. It must find a way to do so without inviting anarchy or disintegration, explained Sherlock Holmes. A delicate balance indeed, Holmes, wondered Dr. John Watson. I ventured this as the weight of his words settled upon me. Lady Beatrice added, her voice a quiet sigh. One hopes that lessons can be learned. One hopes understanding can bridge these chasms before they widen irreparably, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes nodded slowly. The cipher itself was a fascinating study in historical symbolism, was it not, Watson? MacLeod chose his imagery with care. Each symbol was a barb, directed at the perceived injustices of the past. His error, common among fanatics, was to believe that past wrongs could be righted by present evils. In doing so, he merely created new grievances for the future. Sherlock Holmes responded. That evening, back in our Baker Street rooms, I contemplated the affair. Outside, hansoms rumbled on rain-slicked cobbles, scoring London's ceaseless activity. Its sheer complexity was remarkable. The way it had touched upon the very foundations of British identity and imperial policy made it quite unlike any case Holmes had previously undertaken. And so, with due gravity, I take up my pen. The full details of the adventure of the Highland Clearances cipher are destined for the secure archives of the Foreign Office. This is by Mycroft's explicit directive. This applies particularly to details concerning the delicate interplay of international interests. It also covers the vulnerabilities within our own naval command. There, these records will reside, a silent testament to a turbulent episode. They serve as a reminder that the bonds of empire, however strong, require constant vigilance. Perhaps they also require a more profound understanding of the histories that shape us all. For my own records, however, this account must serve. It is for the unique edification of those who follow Mr. Sherlock Holmes's remarkable career.